The store was buzzing with the usual weekend chaos, shoppers chatting, carts rattling, and background music trying to drown out the noise. But in aisle 7, near the glossy display of designer handbags, the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't just a busy store anymore, it was a stage for humiliation. "Use the back door," the store manager snapped, his voice slicing through the air like a whip. Every head in the aisle turned toward her. The words weren't just instructions. They were a command filled with disdain, dripping with contempt, a public decree of her undesirability. The woman standing there, barely 28, wore her best Sunday dress, modest, clean, but clearly ordinary. Her name was Amara, and despite the weight of life pressing down on her shoulders, she carried herself with quiet dignity. But that dignity was being shredded in front of dozens of strangers, many of whom were now holding up phones, capturing the spectacle. Some whispered in shock, others smirked silently as if her shame were entertainment. "Seriously, you can't just go in like everyone else," the manager sneered, pacing around her like a predator circling prey. His words were loud enough for everyone to hear, sharp enough to echo through the store. "I said the back door, do you understand?" Amara's hands tightened around the straps of her tote bag. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. She had learned early in life that arguing rarely changed anything, especially when prejudice had already made its judgment. Around her, the air felt heavier with each passing second. Her heart thudded violently, her pulse screaming in her ears. The crowd watched in silence. No one intervened. Some faces held pity, some curiosity, but the majority, indifference. The kind that burns hotter than any insult. The kind that makes a person feel invisible yet entirely exposed at the same time. And yet beneath her fear a spark of defiance remained. She would not run, not yet, not until she had tried, not until the consequences of doing nothing became far worse than the risk of this moment. "Why can't you just follow the rules?" the manager barked again, leaning forward. "Rules are rules, honey. We can't have people like you disturbing the customers." The words hit Amara like ice water. "People like me," he had said. Not because of anything she had done, but because of the color of her skin, the shape of her purse, the quiet way she carried herself. The crowd didn't cheer, they didn't protest. They just watched, phones raised, eyes wide, silent witnesses to cruelty. Her throat tightened. Tears threatened, but she swallowed them down. She could not allow herself to cry here, not with this audience, not under this weight of unjust judgment. And then she saw her reflection in the polished surface of the display case, her eyes, full of hurt and fear, yet burning with a quiet, defiant fire. "Do you hear me? Use the back door, now." His voice was final, as if sentencing her to an invisible cage separating her from the rest of the world. And then something shifted in the crowd, a murmur subtle at first, barely audible over the manager's tirade. Someone was watching her with a different look. Not amusement, not judgment, but recognition. Awareness, the kind of gaze that hinted at a truth yet unspoken, a secret that could change everything in a heartbeat. Amara didn't see who it was yet, she only felt it. A presence, steady, observing, assessing. A calm in the storm, a promise of intervention, though she could not know what form it would take. Her body stiffened, hope flickering like a candle in a dark room. And in that charged, suffocating moment, the manager smirked, leaning even closer. "I don't have time for people like you." "Back door now?" Before Amara could respond, before anyone could act, a subtle shift rippled through the crowd. The air seemed to hold its breath. Something or someone was coming. And when they finally stepped forward, the entire store would witness a revelation that no one saw coming. But for now, Amara's humiliation was on full display. Her shoulders were tense, her mouth dry, the whispers around her like tiny knives in her ears. She stood frozen, unsure if she should run or confront, while the unseen presence moved closer, carrying with it the weight of justice yet to be delivered. Question of the day: have you ever been judged unfairly by someone with power over you? How did it make you feel? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from. Let's go back to how this story truly began this morning. The sun had barely risen over the worn rooftops of the neighborhood when Amara stirred awake. Her small bedroom was dimly lit by a sliver of morning light slipping through cracked blinds. The air smelled faintly of laundry soap and yesterday's cooking, a mixture both comforting and bitter. Around her, the room was sparse: an old dresser with peeling paint, a single bed with a faded floral sheet, and a small bookshelf with tattered notebooks stacked unevenly. This was not the room of a wealthy woman. It was the room of someone who had learned to find beauty in simplicity. Amara stretched and inhaled deeply, steadying herself for the day ahead. At 28, she carried more responsibilities than most could imagine. She was the eldest of three siblings, a caregiver for her mother who suffered from chronic illness, and a provider for her younger brother still in high school. Every morning was a tightrope walk between exhaustion and duty, yet she moved through it with quiet resilience. In the kitchen, the aroma of instant coffee mingled with the soft hum of a fan. She poured herself a small cup and sipped slowly, savoring the warmth. Across the small table, her younger brother, Jadden, stirred awake, rubbing his eyes and mumbling about a nightmare. "Morning, Jadden," she said softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Did the bad dream wake you?" He nodded, shuffling closer. Amara reached for the small stack of toast she had prepared, breaking it into two pieces and handing him one. "Eat quickly," she urged gently. "Mom will need her medicine soon." Her mother's bedroom door creaked open, and the frail figure of her mother, thin and weary from illness, appeared. Her eyes were tired but immediately lit up at the sight of her daughter. "Morning, baby girl," her mother whispered. "Did you sleep well?" Amara forced a smile. "As well as I could," she replied, though sleep had been scarce. Nights were often restless, filled with worry about bills, food, and the small emergencies life seemed to throw at them. She helped her mother sit up and prepared the morning medication with meticulous care, her hands steady despite the exhaustion that weighed on her shoulders. This was her world, humble, cluttered with responsibilities, yet wrapped in layers of love and dignity. Outside the small apartment window, the neighborhood was waking up too. Children ran barefoot along cracked sidewalks, neighbors exchanged greetings with tired smiles, and the distant sound of buses and cars filled the air. It was a world that could feel oppressive and harsh, yet one that Amara navigated with grace. Her dreams, though small, were vivid. She imagined a life where her mother didn't have to ration medication, where Jadden could attend school without worrying about lunch money, and where she herself could pursue her love for teaching. She had always loved children, always felt a pull toward guiding them, inspiring them to see the possibilities beyond the limitations life had imposed on her family. She dreamed of opening a small tutoring center one day, a place filled with books, hope, and laughter. But today, the weight of reality pressed harder than dreams. Bills stacked in a small folder on the kitchen counter, reminders of payments she could not afford. The pantry had grown emptier over the week, a quiet whisper of hunger threatening to unsettle her younger brother before school. And outside, the world went on, oblivious to the quiet struggles of families like hers. Despite the hardships, Amara's nature was gentle and thoughtful. She prepared Jadden's school uniform, ironing the small wrinkles out with patient care. She hummed a tune softly, a melody from her childhood, as if reminding herself and her brother that beauty could exist even in the most ordinary moments. She tied her mother's scarf around her neck, ensuring warmth for the slow walk to the local clinic later, and kissed both of them on the forehead. Her resilience wasn't loud or aggressive. It was quiet, a steady determination that allowed her to face the world daily, knowing that every step forward mattered. She paused for a moment, glancing around the small apartment. Every object, every worn corner spoke of survival, of love, of endurance. She had learned early that life wasn't fair, but that didn't mean she would surrender to it. As she prepared to leave for the day, Amara picked up her tote bag, checking the small envelope tucked inside. It held the few coins she had managed to save over the past week and a carefully scribbled note about the urgent errand she had to run. Her stomach tightened with worry, but she squared her shoulders. Today was going to be difficult. Today would test her courage. And yet she stepped forward with determination, knowing that despite the challenges, she had the strength to face whatever the world threw at her. In her neighborhood, life went on around her. Children chased after stray balls, elders sipped tea on stoops, and street vendors arranged their produce for the morning rush. Amara's modest dress and worn shoes contrasted with the vibrancy of life around her, but she moved with purpose, a silent declaration that her dignity could never be taken, even if the world sometimes tried. And so, with her heart heavy yet steadfast, she stepped out of the safety of her home and into the uncertain day ahead. She didn't yet know that her path would lead her into humiliation, confrontation, and a test of endurance she had never imagined. But she carried with her an inner strength that no words, insults, or prejudice could ever truly diminish. This was Amara, resilient, compassionate, determined, and quietly extraordinary. As Amara locked the door behind her, the morning sun beat down on the cracked pavement outside. Her tote bag swung gently against her side, but the weight inside felt heavier than mere coins and paper. It was the weight of urgency, of desperation, of responsibility that refused to be ignored. Today, she had no choice but to seek help where help wasn't guaranteed. Her mother's cough had worsened overnight. The dry, rattling sound in her chest had kept Amara awake, her heart tightening with every rasp. She had checked the medicine cabinet that morning and found it nearly empty. The few pills left would not last until the next delivery. And the clinic, barely affordable as it was, could not provide the additional supply without payment up front. She had counted every coin, every small note she had managed to save, and it fell far short. Her mind raced as she walked. The small envelope in her bag contained just enough for a partial prescription, not for the full course of medicine her mother needed. She had already asked neighbors for help, tried local charities, and even considered borrowing from friends, but every avenue had hit a dead end. Today there was only one option left, and it terrified her: asking for assistance directly at the upscale pharmacy downtown, the kind of place where appearances mattered more than need. The thought of humiliation made her stomach twist. She hated the idea of standing there, of being judged, of being seen as less than. She had been taught to hold her dignity even in poverty, but necessity had a way of stripping pride raw. Her mother's life, fragile and precious, depended on her ability to act, to face whatever rejection came her way. And so she pressed on. Her steps were quick but cautious, eyes scanning the street, half expecting the world to judge her before she even entered it. She passed boutique storefronts, their polished windows reflecting the stark contrast between wealth and struggle. Each display of designer handbags, each sparkling watch in the window felt like a silent reminder that she did not belong in these spaces. But today she had no other choice. Her thoughts drifted back to her mother, sitting weakly on the edge of the bed that morning, a blanket barely covering her frail frame. "Amara," her mother had whispered, her voice hoarse, "I don't want to worry you." But worry was already a heavy cloak Amara could not shake. She had promised herself silently that she would not fail her mother. Not now, not ever. And then there was Jadon, her younger brother, who still depended on her guidance and protection. Hunger gnawed at him on mornings when bread was scarce, and she had shielded him from the anxiety of bills and deadlines, but she could not shield him forever. The pressure of keeping a family afloat, keeping hope alive in a world stacked against them, was suffocating. By the time she reached the edge of the luxury shopping district, her palms were damp with sweat, and her heart pounded so hard it threatened to escape her chest. She stopped under the shade of a tree, taking a shaky breath, feeling the envelope inside her bag press like a reminder of the impossible choice she was about to make. She had no guarantee of kindness, no certainty of respect, only the urgent need to save her mother's life. She looked up at the glass doors of the pharmacy ahead, polished and reflective, and felt a pang of fear. Inside, well-dressed patrons moved confidently, holding wallets and shopping lists, completely unaware of the struggles waiting at the threshold. She adjusted her bag over her shoulders, straightened her modest dress, and whispered to herself, "You can do this. You have to do this." Her mind replayed worst-case scenarios, being turned away, mocked, treated like a criminal for daring to ask for help. And yet every thought was immediately chased away by the image of her mother lying weak and feverish, her brother waiting for her return. There was no time to hesitate. Pride had to take a backseat to survival. And so, after a moment's pause, Amara made the painful decision to enter the store, fully aware of the risk of humiliation. She knew the polished floors, the crisp uniforms, and the controlled air of authority would judge her at a glance. But she also knew she had no other path, no other recourse. Every step forward was a gamble, but it was a gamble she could not avoid. Her chest tightened with anxiety as she approached the automatic doors. She ran through the words she might say, the polite gestures, the respectful tone, everything that might spare her from scorn. But deep down, she feared it would not be enough. She feared being dismissed, ridiculed, or worse, publicly humiliated in front of strangers. Yet beneath the fear, a small flame of hope burned. She had carried that flame all her life. Hope for her family, hope for dignity, hope for justice, even in the face of constant obstacles. Today, it was all that remained to guide her steps into the unknown. Amara pressed her hand to the glass door, feeling the cool surface against her palm. The reflection staring back at her was tired, anxious, but resolute. Every line of worry, every shadow under her eyes, told the story of someone who had fought too long to give up now. She inhaled deeply, steeling herself for whatever awaited on the other side, and then she pushed the door open, stepping into a world that could reject her in an instant. This was the moment when desperation met courage. She was entering a battlefield where her dignity would be tested, her patience tried, and her very humanity questioned. And though she did not yet know it, the humiliation that awaited her would be witnessed by strangers, recorded in whispers and phone screens, and ultimately challenged by a force no one could have predicted. Amara had no choice but to keep moving forward, and so she did. Amara's footsteps echoed softly on the cracked sidewalk as she made her way toward the gleaming glass doors of the pharmacy. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because of the small tote bag slung over her shoulder, but because of the invisible weight pressing on her heart, fear, shame, and the burden of responsibility for two lives that depended entirely on her. The streets were beginning to fill with people commuting to work, couples laughing with morning coffee, and children holding tightly to their parents' hands. Everything looked ordinary, almost idyllic, yet Amara's mind was a storm of anxiety. She kept glancing at her reflection in shop windows, noting the worn shoes, the faded dress, the tense posture. In her heart, she knew that any one of these signs could invite judgment. She felt as if every passerby could sense her struggle and had already labeled her unworthy, incapable, invisible. Her chest tightened with each approaching block. "It's just a store," she whispered to herself, trying to steady her trembling hands. "It's just a store, you faced worse." But even as she spoke, the echoes of past humiliation haunted her. Growing up in a neighborhood where her family was often overlooked, where opportunity rarely knocked and kindness came in short supply, Amara had learned the harsh truth. The world often judged before it understood. Her mind wandered to her mother. She pictured the frail woman sitting on the edge of the bed that morning, blanket barely covering her shoulders, eyes bright with a silent plea that Amara had felt more than heard. And then there was Jadden, still in his school uniform, his small frame betraying the invisible hunger he often carried without complaint. The thought of their suffering spurred her onward, a small but unwavering flame of hope against the rising tide of fear. As she turned a corner, the pharmacy came into full view. Its exterior was pristine, almost intimidating, a gleaming facade of polished glass, chrome handles, and a large, immaculately dressed staff moving with practiced efficiency. The contrast between this world and the one she had left behind was staggering. Here, appearances mattered. Here, status was assumed before words were even spoken. And here, she, with her modest dress and worn shoes, felt painfully exposed. Amara paused for a moment on the curb, drawing in a shaky breath. She could see the people inside, moving in orderly patterns, scanning items and exchanging pleasantries. The manager at the front desk, who she had already imagined in her worst-case scenarios, had not yet noticed her. But she felt certain that once she crossed that threshold, she would be under a microscope. She adjusted the strap of her tote bag and smoothed her dress, a futile attempt to appear more acceptable in a world that had already decided she did not belong. Fear and hope walked beside her like twin companions. Fear whispered of rejection, scorn, and humiliation. Hope, small and fragile, reminded her why she was here, why she could not turn back. She had rehearsed her words 100 times in her mind, polite, respectful, concise. But she knew that no amount of preparation could shield her from the unpredictability of human cruelty. And yet she had no alternative. This path, terrifying as it was the only route to save her mother's life. She noticed the subtle ways in which the store projected authority. The shining floors reflected fluorescent light in sharp angles, the checkout counters gleamed like ivory towers, and the employees moved with a confidence that came from a lifetime of certainty and privilege. Every detail reminded her of the barriers she faced, not just today, but in every aspect of her life. And yet, despite the intimidation, she squared her shoulders. Her resolve did not waver. She would step forward, even if trembling, even if she were mocked. The crowd outside the pharmacy lobby had begun to swell slightly, shoppers chatting, glancing at their phones, unaware of the storm about to unfold. Amara's pulse quickened as she approached the automatic doors. Each step felt deliberate, a silent defiance against every invisible boundary the world had ever placed on her. She felt the familiar tightness in her throat, a rising panic that threatened to stop her mid-step. She inhaled deeply, grounding herself, repeating a mantra she had whispered to herself countless times. "You are not invisible. You are not unworthy. You are here for a reason." As she reached the threshold, she paused. The glass doors reflected her image back at her, a young woman worn by life's hardships but burning with quiet determination. Her hands were clammy, her stomach twisted in knots, but her eyes burned with focus. For a brief moment, she hesitated, almost allowing fear to overtake her. Then, with a final deep breath, she stepped forward. The doors parted with a soft whoosh and the polished interior of the store swallowed her whole. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and new merchandise. Shoppers looked up briefly, curious at the sight of her modest appearance, and then returned to their routines. She could feel the eyes of the manager upon her even before he spoke. The moment she had feared and strangely anticipated was here. Her heart pounded as she took her first step onto the pristine floor. Every fiber of her being screamed both to flee and to stand firm. She was alone yet determined, vulnerable yet defiant, and at that instant she could not know that among the crowd someone was watching her, a presence calm, aware, and ready to intervene in ways that would soon change everything. Amara paused near the entrance, shoulders squared, her hands gripping the straps of her bag. The moment stretched taut with tension. And then the voice cut through the air like a blade, a tone she had anticipated but dreaded. "Use the back door, now!" It was the manager, and the confrontation which would test her courage and her dignity to the breaking point was about to begin. The moment Amara crossed the threshold, the manager's gaze snapped onto her like a predator zeroing in on prey. He was a man in his 40s, impeccably dressed, with a carefully maintained aura of authority that relied on intimidation. His eyes narrowed the instant they met hers, and the polite veneer that masked the cruelty lurking beneath fell away entirely. "You, what are you doing here?" he barked, stepping out from behind the polished counter. The words carried not a hint of curiosity, but a sharp edge of suspicion, judgment, and blatant disdain. The few shoppers near the entrance glanced over, their curiosity piqued. Some hid it behind polite expressions, others didn't bother, eyes darting between Amara and the manager with the quiet thrill of witnessing a spectacle. Amara's throat tightened, her pulse quickening. She opened her mouth to respond, to explain, but the manager cut her off sharply. "I've told people like you before, this isn't your place." His voice carried through the store, commanding attention. He waved a dismissive hand toward the back, as if she were an intruder in his carefully curated world. "Use the back door, do you understand? Do you hear me?" Her lips trembled, but she tried to steady herself. I only need a small prescription, my mother." "I don't care whose mother," he interrupted, his tone rising into near shouting. "We cannot allow people who don't belong here disturb the other customers." Amara froze, feeling the sting of humiliation sear through her. Every word he spoke branded her as unworthy, as someone less than human. The echo of "people like you" cut deep, igniting a mix of fear, anger, and helplessness. She clenched her fists at her sides, swallowing back a sob that threatened to escape. Around her, the crowd began to shift. Phones emerged from pockets, cameras raised. Some whispered to each other, speculation coloring their words. "Did you hear that? Why is he yelling at her like that? What did she do?" Yet no one moved to intervene. The silence of complicity wrapped around her like a heavy blanket, suffocating her more than any insult. "Now, back door, move!" the manager snapped, stepping closer, his polished shoes echoing sharply against the tiled floor. Amara's heart pounded so violently she thought it might burst. Each beat seemed to mock her dignity, reminding her that she was standing alone against authority, against prejudice, against the cold indifference of strangers. She opened her mouth again, voice small but firm. "Sir, please, I only need the medicine for my mother. I don't mean any trouble. Please." The manager sneered, leaning down slightly to meet her eye level, as if to physically dominate her as well. "Don't trouble me with excuses. Excuses are for people who don't belong here. Rules are rules. Now go." Amara felt heat rise in her chest, not anger, not yet, but shame and fear, her vision blurred with unshed tears. The whispering crowd had grown louder, some voices curious, some mocking, none intervening. She felt every pair of eyes as a weight pressing her further into despair. She had never felt so small, so exposed, so completely alone. And then, as if on cue, a group of well-dressed shoppers stepped around her, exchanging hurried glances. Their eyes held the familiar mixture of discomfort and indifference, the kind of silent complicity that confirms the injustice rather than challenges it. She wanted to shout, to demand decency, but the words stuck in her throat. The manager's tone grew sharper, almost cruelly theatrical. "Do you think you can just waltz in here, disrupt everything, and expect kindness? We don't serve your kind here. Now get out." The words hit her like a physical blow. Amara's hands shook, her lips parted in a silent, wordless protest. Every fiber of her being screamed that she had done nothing wrong, that she was simply seeking help. But the truth didn't matter here. In this space, her worth was determined not by her actions, but by the manager's prejudiced perception, and she was failing his test. She took a step backward, her mind racing. Every instinct urged her to leave, to retreat to the safety of the streets, to escape the sting of public shaming. Yet somewhere deep inside, a stubborn flame refused to die, the stubborn insistence that her mother's life depended on this moment. She squared her shoulders, hands still gripping the tote, and whispered to herself, "I can't leave, not now, not ever." The manager leaned even closer, his shadow falling across her like a dark cloud. "Back door now, or I will call security. Do you understand me?" Her lips quivered as she tried again, words barely audible over the growing murmurs of the crowd. "Please, it's just medicine. My mother, she's sick, please." The manager's expression hardened into pure disdain. "I said back door or out." His voice was thunderous, echoing across the polished floors. The crowd froze, their phones capturing every moment. Amara felt the sting of humiliation in every fiber of her being, the weight of injustice pressing down so heavily she thought she might collapse on the cold tile. And yet, amid the fear and despair, there was a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere. Someone in the crowd was watching, not with judgment, but with attention, with recognition. A presence that carried authority, calm, and awareness. A presence that promised the possibility of justice, though Amara could not yet see it. Her shoulders stiffened, and her eyes flicked toward the movement in the crowd, sensing that her ordeal, though still raging, was about to encounter a force beyond the manager's cruelty. But at that moment, as the manager leaned forward, voice booming, and the crowd held its breath, Amara felt every second stretch like an eternity. This was judgment without mercy, humiliation without relief, and the emotional weight threatened to crush her. She had stepped into the world seeking help, and found herself utterly exposed, alone, and at the mercy of prejudice. Amara's knees threatened to buckle beneath her as the manager's words cut through the store like a jagged blade. Each command, sharp, impatient, dripping with disdain, felt like another layer of weight pressing down on her chest. Her palms were slick with sweat, her heart pounding as if it could burst from the sheer pressure of humiliation. She opened her mouth to speak, to plead, but the words lodged somewhere between fear and disbelief. Every syllable seemed inadequate, powerless against the manager's booming voice and the judgment of the silent, watching crowd. She could feel the heat creeping up her neck, her ears burning as her shame spread outward like wildfire. I just need the medicine." She whispered, voice barely audible, trembling with emotion. Her fingers clutched the tote bag so tightly that the straps bit into her palms. She could feel tears welling, threatening to spill. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let them fall. Crying here in front of all these strangers would feel like admitting defeat, like confirming the truth the manager wanted to declare, that she was nothing. "Do you hear me? Back door now." The manager barked again, stepping closer, towering over her, his shadow engulfing her small frame. His smirk was sharp, cruel, a weapon sharper than any knife. The crowd, once just curious, now hung in a stifling silence. Phones hovered in hands, recording, capturing the scene like a modern-day lynching. Some faces showed pity, some curiosity, but almost all were passive. No one spoke up. No one intervened. Amara felt that silence as deeply as the insults themselves. It pressed against her ears, her chest, her very soul. It was heavier than the words, more suffocating than the manager's scorn. Her shoulders slumped, and a sharp, shuddering breath escaped her. She could barely meet anyone's gaze. For a moment she considered stepping backward, fleeing from the cold judgment and disappearing into the relative safety of the street outside. She could leave now, escape the humiliation, and maybe her mother would survive another day. But even that thought was tainted with despair because the problem wasn't going away. Her mother's life still depended on her. Her mind raced, memories flashing unbidden. Her mother's frail hands, the cough that shook her body in the early hours of the morning, her brother quietly searching the pantry for scraps. Every loving image reinforced the urgency. Every desperate thought strengthened the resolve that she could not surrender. Yet even as determination flickered, the manager's next words hit her harder than she expected. "You think you can just stroll in here, disrupt our order, and demand respect? Don't make me laugh. People like you don't belong in places like this. Now leave." The words were cruelly final, designed to crush spirit and confidence, and for a brief, terrible moment they succeeded. Amara's tears finally slipped free, sliding down her cheeks in silent, shameful streams. She wanted to apologize for existing, for taking up space, for daring to need help. She wanted to apologize to the manager, to the shoppers, even to herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't mean to," but no one spoke in her defense. The manager's voice continued to rain down judgment. The shoppers averted their eyes, murmured under their breath, or adjusted their phones, capturing every second for entertainment. The weight of being unseen, yet entirely exposed, pressed down like a vice. Amara felt herself slipping as if the floor beneath her had vanished. Her identity, her dignity, her very sense of self, all were being stripped away under the manager's cruelty and the crowd's indifference. She considered turning, running out the front door, and leaving her mother's urgent need unresolved. She considered collapsing entirely, letting the shame and exhaustion consume her. She felt like she had reached the bottom of an invisible pit, a place where courage seemed futile and hope a distant memory. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. The world seemed tilted, distant, muted except for the manager's voice, sharp and relentless. She could feel her body trembling from the adrenaline, the fear, the shame, the effort of holding herself upright in a place that did not welcome her. And yet, even in that abyss, a small spark remained. Deep inside, beneath the tears, beneath the fear, beneath the physical and emotional exhaustion, a quiet heartbeat insisted that she was not yet defeated. Her mother needed her. Her brother needed her. She needed to stand, if only for one more moment. Amara's eyes scanned the crowd automatically, seeking some sign, any sign of intervention. But the silence was deafening. The lack of support, the passive observation of strangers, weighed heavier than the manager's cruelty. She felt utterly alone, but in that loneliness she also felt a faint, intangible presence at the edge of her awareness. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but different from the judgment and indifference around her. Calm, observant, waiting, watching, something or someone was aware of her suffering, aware of the injustice, aware of the humiliation that had escalated to an unbearable peak. For the first time in what felt like eternity, Amara's trembling slowed slightly. She did not yet know who was watching, or why, or what would happen next. But in the chaos of her despair, there was a fragile promise that the situation might change, that justice, compassion, and intervention might finally arrive. Her knees shook as she took another trembling step forward, her voice still soft, her body still quivering. But inside, that spark, hope, courage, resilience refused to die. She had reached her rock bottom. The silence of the crowd had weighed heavier than words, and yet it was at this moment, at this lowest point, that the possibility of salvation quietly stepped into the frame. Somewhere in the crowd, a presence moved closer, calm, dignified, and aware. And in the next heartbeat, that presence would intervene, turning the tide of humiliation and injustice into something that no one, least of all the cruel manager, could have anticipated. Amara, exhausted, shaking, and tear-streaked, was about to meet the person who would change everything. Amara's shoulders shook as she fought back tears, her voice barely audible over the echo of the manager's relentless scorn. The air in the store felt thick, heavy with tension, as though the very walls bore witness to her humiliation. She had already lost herself in the fear, the shame, and the impossible weight of public judgment, when a sudden hush rippled through the crowd. It was subtle at first, a faint movement, a shift in attention, but instantly it drew her eyes. Among the onlookers, a figure had stepped forward, someone whose presence alone commanded respect. Not loudly, not aggressively, but with a calm authority that cut through the chaos like sunlight piercing storm clouds. The man was tall, immaculately dressed in a tailored navy suit that suggested power and influence, yet his expression was soft, composed, and attentive. His eyes, sharp but compassionate, scanned the scene with a clarity that made Amara's heart pound, not with fear this time, but with a tentative hope she hadn't felt in minutes. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm yet carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. It was not the shouting, bullying kind of authority she had endured, but the type that made people stop and listen, simply because it was impossible to ignore. His gaze settled on Amara for a moment, meeting hers with gentle reassurance. She felt as if, for the first time in this ordeal, someone truly saw her, not as a problem, not as an annoyance, but as a human being in need. Then he turned his eyes to the manager. "Sir," he began, his tone firm but measured, "I believe we need to reconsider how we are treating our customers." The manager blinked, momentarily startled by the interruption. Who are you?" he demanded, his voice tight, defensive. He stepped forward, attempting to assert dominance, but the man's presence was steady, immovable, and immediately disarming. "I am simply someone who expects courtesy and professionalism," the man replied evenly, taking a step closer. His calmness contrasted starkly with the manager's frantic aggression. "And I would like to ensure that this young woman is treated fairly as any customer should be." The manager's smirk faltered slightly, replaced by a flash of irritation. "Fairly? This. This is a privilege-based environment. We have rules that she clearly does not meet. He gestured toward Amara as if she were the source of all disruption, all chaos. Amara's chest tightened, but she could feel the tension in the room shifting. There was now a force in her corner, subtle but undeniable. She dared to glance at the man again, meeting his calm, empathetic gaze. It was as if he were silently telling her, "You are not alone. You will not fall here." The man raised a hand slightly, signaling the manager to pause. "I understand rules exist," he said, his voice controlled yet firm, "but no rule justifies public humiliation. No rule permits cruelty, judgment based solely on appearance, or the denial of help to someone in genuine need." The manager's nostrils flared, his defensive posture stiffening. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is my store. I make the rules." The man's expression did not waver. "I am well aware that this is your place of work, but I am also aware that we are all accountable for how we treat others, and today you are failing that basic responsibility." Amara felt a trembling mixture of disbelief and relief. Someone had finally intervened, someone with enough authority to command respect, someone who refused to let her suffer in silence. The crowd around them shifted instinctively, sensing the change in energy. Whispers replaced muttered judgments, and phones hovered uncertainly as curiosity morphed into suspense. The manager's mouth opened as if to protest, but the man's calm, unwavering gaze stopped him. There was no aggression, no threat of retaliation, only undeniable dignity and presence. It was a subtle, powerful kind of authority that needed no volume to assert itself. Amara's shoulders, which had sagged under the weight of shame moments ago, straightened slightly. She felt the faintest tremor of courage returning, a spark of hope she had almost forgotten. Here was someone who could challenge the injustice she was enduring, not with anger, not with violence, but with undeniable presence and moral authority. The man bent slightly toward Amara, speaking softly, so only she could hear. "You are safe now," he murmured, his voice gentle but filled with conviction. "You have done nothing wrong. Stand tall." Tears welled in Amara's eyes, but this time they were not just from humiliation. They were from relief, from the sudden recognition that compassion existed even in places she had feared. The silent, judgmental crowd seemed to fade as her focus locked on the calm figure before her. And yet there remained one unknown. The manager still did not know who this man truly was. He assumed, as many did, that Amara was simply being defended by another customer, perhaps an overzealous bystander. The subtle tension lingered. Would the manager heed the warning, or would he continue his cruelty? The answer as yet remained unseen. Amara's trembling lessened. She could feel hope stirring alongside the lingering fear. The stage was set. The tide of humiliation had begun to shift, and the next moment, when the man would reveal the truth of his power and identity, would change everything. For the first time since stepping into the store, Amara dared to breathe. The manager's smirk had begun to falter. He was used to commanding fear and compliance, and yet the man before him, tall, composed, and utterly unshakable, refused to yield. The crowd sensed it too. Murmurs rippled through the store, a mixture of curiosity and tension. Phones hovered in mid-air as if the witnesses themselves could feel the moment swelling into something monumental. The manager squared his shoulders, puffing his chest. "Listen, I don't know who you are, but you're not in a position to." The man raised a hand, gently but with unmistakable authority, silencing him. "No, you need to listen very carefully." His voice carried across the store, calm yet unwavering, and it had the effect of commanding attention. "I am the owner of this establishment. I am the CEO, and what you are doing right now, your behavior is utterly unacceptable." The store seemed to gasp collectively. Amara froze, blinking in disbelief. Words sank slowly at first, then like a tidal wave. The owner, the CEO, her humiliation moments before unbearable now collided with astonishment, fear, and cautious hope. The manager's face paled. His eyes widened, a flicker of panic replacing the arrogance that had dominated his every gesture moments ago. You can't, this is impossible. Impossible," the CEO repeated, his tone sharp but still measured, slicing through the manager's defenses. "Nothing about your actions is acceptable. You have publicly humiliated a customer. You have judged someone based on nothing but appearance. You have violated every standard of professionalism and decency, and because of that, you will face the consequences immediately." The manager stammered, words failing him as the reality of his situation sank in. His confidence, once unshakable, collapsed under the weight of the revelation. The crowd began to murmur louder now, whispers of shock spreading through the store. Phones clicked, capturing every stunned expression, every faltering word. Amara could hardly believe what she was hearing. The very person she had feared would never intervene, the one who could change the outcome, was here, and the power was in their hands. She felt a tremor of relief, tears threatening to spill for a completely different reason this time. She had gone from being completely alone, completely powerless, to being fully seen, fully validated, and fully protected. The CEO's eyes, warm yet piercing, settled on Amara. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. His voice was a stark contrast to the harshness she had endured moments ago. There was no judgment, no condescension, only care and acknowledgement of her humanity. Amara nodded, voice trembling. I think so. Thank you." The CEO's gaze then swung back to the manager. "You will pack your things and leave immediately. Security will escort you. There is no place here for cruelty or prejudice, and there will be no tolerance for behavior like yours." The manager's jaw tightened. He tried to protest again, but the CEO's calm authority left no room for argument. Every inch of the room seemed to hold its breath, witnessing the dramatic reversal of power. The crowd shifted, some whispering excitedly, others staring in stunned silence at the humiliation now turned on the one who had wielded it. "You will also undergo mandatory training in respect, equality, and customer service before you can work anywhere else in this company," the CEO continued, his voice carrying the kind of weight that brooked no dissent. "And know this, anyone who treats another human being like this will be held accountable, no exceptions." The manager's shoulders slumped, and he muttered under his breath, clearly aware that the record of his actions, captured by numerous witnesses' phones, would follow him for a long time. He backed toward the door, humiliated, defeated, powerless, exactly as he had made Amara feel minutes ago. Amara felt a tremor run through her body. Relief, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of justice swirled together inside her. The CEO turned fully to her, his expression softening. "Let's make sure you get what you came here for," he said, nodding toward the pharmacy counter. She blinked, her voice breaking as she whispered, You would do that?" "Of course," he said firmly. "No one should be denied help or treated cruelly. Not you, not anyone." The crowd, still watching, began to clap softly at first, then more loudly, a ripple of approval and astonishment spreading through the store. The manager, once the center of authority, now receded into the background of his own shame. Phones still recorded, but the story had dramatically shifted. Justice, compassion, and integrity were now center stage. Amara finally allowed herself to breathe fully. The knot of fear and shame that had twisted her chest unraveled slightly. She could feel her body relaxing, her head lifting, and the spark of hope she had clung to since leaving her home that morning flaring into a steady flame. And in that moment, she realized something profound. Even when the world seems determined to humiliate and dismiss you, there are forces of justice, compassion, and dignity that can appear, sometimes when least expected, and restore what cruelty tries to take away. The CEO bent slightly, handing her the prescription personally, his gesture deliberate, ensuring that the moment carried not just relief but respect. "Take this," he said softly, "and know that the world can be cruel, but it can also be kind, and sometimes justice comes at exactly the right moment." Amara nodded, tears streaming freely now, but no longer of shame. Gratitude, disbelief, and a quiet joy mingled together. The crowd watched, captivated, as the story of humiliation had been transformed into a story of revelation, justice, and human decency. The manager's defeat, the CEO's calm authority, and the crowd's realization that they had witnessed a true injustice. This was the moment that would be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. For Amara, it was the moment her world shifted. The moment she realized that dignity, courage, and hope could never truly be taken away, no matter how cruel the immediate circumstances. The manager, once loud and arrogant, now moved toward the door in stunned silence. Every step he took echoed his defeat. Security followed him quietly, firm but polite, ensuring that there would be no further disruption. The crowd, still murmuring in awe, realized the magnitude of what they had witnessed. Humiliation had flipped, and justice had taken its place in the spotlight. The manager's departure was not just physical, it was symbolic. The very authority he had wielded like a weapon was stripped from him in a single, undeniable moment. Amara, still clutching her tote bag, felt her body tremble, not from fear now, but from the adrenaline of relief and the sudden, overwhelming recognition that her courage had not been in vain. The CEO, standing beside her, gave a subtle nod, one that conveyed both respect and reassurance. For the first time that day, she felt seen not as a problem, but as a person with inherent worth. "You did nothing wrong," the CEO said softly, his voice carrying warmth and authority simultaneously. "What just happened here, it was never your fault. Your courage brought the truth into the light." Amara blinked, tears slipping down her cheeks, unable to form words at first. "I don't even know what to say," she whispered, voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "I thank you for seeing me." "You don't need to thank me," he said firmly, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "The only thanks I need is knowing that you and your family are taken care of. That's what matters." With a gesture, the CEO personally guided her to the pharmacy counter. Staff members, previously tense and unsure, now moved with renewed professionalism, filling her prescriptions swiftly and carefully. They handed her the medicine with genuine respect, a stark contrast to the contempt they had earlier witnessed. Every action sent the message that dignity and humanity mattered more than appearances or assumptions. But the CEO's intervention did not stop there. He addressed Amara with a quiet gravity. "I want to ensure that your family doesn't face this kind of struggle again. Come with me after this, and we will discuss how we can help, not just today, but for the long term." Amara's chest tightened again, this time with disbelief and cautious hope. You mean that? You'd help my family?" "Yes," he said, unwavering. "This store, this company, this moment, it is only the beginning. You should never have had to endure that humiliation in the first place. Let's make sure you never have to again." In the days that followed, the consequences for the manager were swift and decisive. The CEO ensured his termination was immediate, his behavior documented, and made a clear example of what could not be tolerated. Legal actions were initiated where necessary, and professional contacts across the industry were informed of the misconduct, ensuring that he could not simply move on and continue such cruelty elsewhere. His arrogance, his prejudice, and his public humiliation had finally caught up to him, and the world now saw that accountability was real. Meanwhile, Amara and her family's lives began to transform in ways they could never have imagined. The CEO arranged for immediate financial support to cover her mother's medical expenses, ensuring that life-saving medications would be available without fear or delay. Jadden's school fees were secured, along with tutoring support for his studies, giving him opportunities previously out of reach. Amara herself was offered a stable job at the company, tailored to her skills and passions. Recognizing her love for children and teaching, the CEO connected her with programs to support community education initiatives, giving her not only financial stability but also a sense of purpose and empowerment. Her small apartment was renovated, creating a comfortable, safe environment for her family. For the first time in years, worry and fear were replaced by security and possibility. Yet the most profound gift was not material, it was dignity restored. For the first time in a long while, Amara walked into public spaces without the shadow of fear and judgment pressing on her shoulders. She knew that people's cruelty was not a reflection of her worth. She had been seen, respected, and uplifted, and that realization gave her a strength she had only glimpsed in fleeting moments before. One afternoon, standing with her mother and brother in their newly arranged home, Amara turned to the CEO. "I don't even know how to express my gratitude," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "You didn't just help my family, you gave me hope. You reminded me that people can be kind and justice can prevail." The CEO shook his head gently. "You did this," he said firmly. "You faced fear and injustice head-on. My role was simply to make sure that what should have happened actually did. You are the one who stood tall when it mattered most. Never forget that." Amara held the medicine in her hand, the tangible symbol of her family's survival, and felt a warmth spread through her chest. In that moment, she understood something profound. Courage, dignity, and compassion were not just abstract ideals. They were forces that could change lives, ripple outward, and transform even the darkest moments into something beautiful. The world had not been fair to her that day, or any day before. But in the end, justice had been served, compassion had prevailed, and her family's lives had been irrevocably changed for the better. Years had passed since that fateful morning when Amara had walked into the pharmacy, trembling and uncertain, carrying nothing but a tote bag and the weight of her family's survival on her shoulders. The memory of the manager's cruel words, the public humiliation, the whispered judgments of strangers, and the suffocating silence of bystanders still lingered, but it no longer held power over her. Those moments had become the catalyst for a life she could scarcely have imagined then. Now Amara stood in a sunlit classroom, her posture confident, her voice steady, addressing a group of children with warmth and authority. Her mother, fully recovered thanks to consistent medical care, sat in the front row, smiling with pride. Jadden, taller now, attentive and eager, listened carefully, occasionally nodding at his sister's words. The room was filled with laughter, curiosity, and the quiet hum of learning, a far cry from the uncertainty and struggle that had defined her youth. Amara had not only secured her family's stability, but had also embraced the opportunity to give back. The CEO who had once intervened on her behalf had connected her with initiatives in community education and mentorship programs. She had been trained, supported, and empowered to guide children from underprivileged neighborhoods, teaching them not only academics but resilience, dignity, and self-worth, the lessons she had learned in the hardest of ways. As she moved around the classroom, helping a child with a difficult problem, Amara's eyes sparkled with a mix of determination and compassion. She had transformed fear into purpose, humiliation into empathy, and desperation into advocacy. Every life she touched now carried a piece of her story, a story of survival, courage, and the power of being seen. After the final bell, she walked home with her mother and brother, the sun casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. Their home, modest but comfortable, was filled with laughter and gratitude. Amara reflected on the journey that had brought them here, the fear of rejection, the suffocating weight of judgment, the rock-bottom despair she had once felt in that pharmacy lobby. Every trial, every tear had led her to this place of strength and fulfillment. She thought of the CEO again, the calm, dignified presence that had intervened when no one else would. His actions had not just solved a temporary problem. They had set into motion a chain of compassion and accountability that had reshaped her entire life. And she knew, without a doubt, that the kindness he had shown was not limited to one day, one action, or one family. It was a principle that could ripple outward, inspiring others to act with integrity and courage. Amara paused outside her home, looking at the street she had once crossed, trembling and fearful. She inhaled deeply, feeling gratitude and awe intertwine. Her journey had taught her that dignity is never diminished by circumstance, that courage can exist even in the smallest acts, and that justice and compassion, when wielded thoughtfully, have the power to transform lives forever. She knelt to adjust a bicycle for a neighborhood child, offering encouragement and a smile. "You're capable of more than you know," she said softly. "Never let anyone tell you otherwise." It was advice born not from theory, but from lived experience, a reminder that the smallest gestures of belief and kindness could become life-changing. Later that evening, as she sat with her family around the dinner table, the conversation light and filled with laughter, Amara allowed herself a moment of reflection. The fear and shame she had once carried were now distant echoes, replaced by resilience, empowerment, and gratitude. She realized that life's trials do not define a person. How they respond, the courage they summon, and the compassion they cultivate do. Amara had lived through humiliation, despair, and near defeat, but she had also lived through intervention, validation, and grace. And in those years, she had transformed those experiences into a force for good, helping countless others find their own dignity and hope. Her story, now a tapestry of struggle, courage, and triumph, carried a clear and simple moral. Humanity is measured not by the wealth one possesses, but by the compassion one shows. Kindness has the power to change lives. And even in the darkest moments, courage, resilience, and hope can light the way to a brighter future. As the camera of imagination pans over her peaceful neighborhood, the laughter of children, the warmth of her family, and the spark of empowerment she carries into the community, one truth remains undeniable. One act of intervention, one moment of compassion can ripple outward and change countless lives forever. So, to everyone watching, wherever you are, remember that your choices matter. Your words, your actions, your willingness to stand for what is right, they have the power to transform despair into hope, fear into courage, and humiliation into dignity. If Amara's story inspired you, imagine the difference we could make if each of us chose compassion over judgment, courage over indifference, and action over silence. Share this story, spread the message, and subscribe for more real-life stories of triumph, resilience, and the life-changing power of kindness. Because sometimes the smallest act of courage can change a life forever, and sometimes that life is your own.